The alien roared, not in victory, but in agony. A sound like tearing metal echoed through the ruined corridor as Captain Ilarith, once commander of the Gyri Dominion's warfleet, crashed into the shattered wall. Blue blood splattered against alloy and flame. His left mandible hung loose. His breathing rasped through a split carapace. The last battle on Outpost Hellas 9 had ended hours ago. The Dominion's banners were ashes. The human fleet had left orbit. Only the broken remained, and among the ruins a small light flickered. A human flashlight. Ilarith's damaged eyes flared with fury. "Come to finish me, ape," he snarled, voice clicking in pain. He tried to rise, but his legs folded beneath him like paper. The human froze in the smoke. Just a young soldier, his armor cracked, his helmet off. Mud smeared his cheek. His name tag read Reynolds. He didn't raise his weapon. He raised his hands. Slowly. Peacefully. "I'm not here to fight," Reynolds said quietly. "I'm looking for survivors." Ilarith spat a mix of blood and contempt. "Then you found one. Kill me and earn your promotion." The human stepped closer, his breath visible in the freezing air. "You're bleeding out. You'll die in minutes if I do nothing." "Then let me die," the alien hissed. Reynolds crouched, ignoring the claws inches from his face. He opened a medkit. Human tech, crude compared to Dominion standards, but warm with life. "Can't do that," he said simply. Ilarith's 4 eyes narrowed. "You do not understand what I am. What I've done." "Oh, I understand," Reynolds said, voice trembling. "I saw the Dominion's orbital bombardments. I saw what your kind did to my people. But right now..." He gently pressed a sealant patch against a wound. "You're just another living thing trying not to die alone." For the first time in decades, Ilarith had no answer. No defiance. Just the pain. He stared at this fragile human, barely past youth, who risked his own life in enemy territory for no gain. The Gyri had taught him humans were deceitful, weak, opportunistic. But this one's hands didn't shake from fear. They shook from compassion. When the patch hissed shut, Reynolds whispered, "There, that should stop the bleeding for now." Ilarith growled, "You saved me only to interrogate me." Reynolds sat beside him against the cold wall, breathing heavily. "No interrogation. My unit's gone. I just don't want to be alone." The alien blinked, a gesture that, for his kind, meant disbelief. A war beast of the Dominion saved by a single lonely human. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the groans of a dying outpost. Outside, storms clawed at the sky. Somewhere far away, the last transport ships left orbit, abandoning them both. Ilarith shifted, his voice quieter now. "Your people. They will not return for you," Reynolds nodded. "Yeah, I know." "Then you are doomed." "Guess we both are," the human replied with a small, tired smile. Something cracked inside the alien, something that no plasma round could touch. He had seen soldiers of countless species die with curses or silence, but not like this. Not with calm acceptance. Not with kindness left to spare. Ilarith muttered, "You're a fool." "Maybe," Reynolds said. "But a stubborn one." The alien looked away. His 4-fingered hand trembled once, then slowly reached out. A gesture of truce. The human took it without hesitation. Outside, lightning tore through the storm, illuminating the ruined base. 2 enemies sitting side by side amid the wreckage of their empires. For the first time since the war began, Captain Ilarith did not feel like a commander, a conqueror, or a monster. He felt... and for reasons he couldn't explain, he whispered, almost to himself, "You stayed when I was broken. Human." The words lingered in the cold air, heavy with a strange new weight. The storm screamed for 3 days straight. Metal bent, glass shattered. The sky itself seemed to burn. Reynolds woke to the groan of collapsing steel and the cold that bit through his armor. His vision blurred, a dim orange light flickering from a dying generator. Beside him, Captain Ilarith stirred, his breathing ragged but alive. The med patches had held. "You're still breathing," Reynolds muttered, voice hoarse. Ilarith's mandibles twitched in faint irritation. "Disappointed, human?" Reynolds managed a tired grin. "Kinda hoped you'd make breakfast." The alien blinked, confusion mixed with exhaustion, before releasing a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but close enough to make Reynolds smile wider. They were trapped deep within the collapsed outpost's lower corridor. The upper levels had caved in under bombardment and storm debris. The comms tower was gone. Their only light came from a single emergency unit that flickered like a heartbeat. Reynolds scavenged what he could: protein packs, water pouches, and a cracked thermal blanket. He handed the latter to Ilarith, who stared at it as though it were a weapon. "It's heat," Reynolds explained. "Wrap it around your carapace. It'll keep your vitals stable." Ilarith hissed softly. "Jyri warriors endure cold." "Yeah, well, I endure stupidity," Reynolds replied, tossing it into the alien's lap. "Take it anyway." For a moment, Ilarith just looked at him, this strange creature who gave orders to a Dominion captain as if he were a recruit. Then reluctantly he covered himself. The warmth that seeped in was alien but oddly comforting. Silence lingered, until a sound shattered it, a distant clang. A deep echo through the vents, then voices. Ilarith's eyes flared. "Scavengers." Reynolds froze. "Friendly?" "Not for either of us." The Jyri knew the type. War scavengers who stripped battlefields of corpses, tech, and anything that screamed profit. They weren't loyal to anyone. And if they found a wounded alien and a lone human soldier hiding together, both would end up on the same dissecting table. Reynolds checked his weapon, half a clip left. His hands shook slightly. Ilarith noticed. "You fear," the alien said. "Yeah," Reynolds whispered. "Means I'm alive." The voices grew louder, boots and claws scraping over steel. A beam of light sliced through the cracks in the wall. Ilarith tried to stand, pain making his limbs tremble. "Give me the weapon," he said. "Not a chance," Reynolds answered. "You are weak." "I am trained for—" I said no, the human snapped. Then softer. "You're still bleeding inside. You'd die before firing a second shot." Ilarith stared at him, rage and confusion colliding. No one had ever defied him, especially not a frail mammal from a defeated world. And yet Reynolds stood there, shaking, half-starved, but ready to fight for them both. The scavengers kicked through the door. Reynolds moved first. He grabbed a fallen pipe, struck the first intruder in the visor, and fired twice at the second. Plasma flashed blue-white. Sparks filled the corridor. Ilarith, driven by instinct, lunged, claws slashing, pain forgotten. The alien's roar drowned out the storm. Metal shrieked as another scavenger fell. Then, silence again. Only the wind outside. Reynolds leaned against the wall, chest heaving. We did it." Ilarith stared at the bodies, then at the human beside him. Bruised, burned, still standing. "You fought for me," the alien said, disbelief heavy in his tone. Reynolds shrugged weakly. "Yeah, well, can't have you dying on my watch, partner." "Partner." The word felt strange, almost holy on Ilarith's tongue. No human had ever said it to him. No soldier, no ally, not even his own kind after his failures. He looked down at the human's bloodied knuckles and whispered, "You stayed when you could have fled." Reynolds gave a half smile, eyes tired but steady. "Told you I'm stubborn." For a long moment neither spoke. The storm raged, lightning flashing through the broken roof. But inside, between the fallen metal and flickering lights, something fragile and new began to form. Not peace, not yet, but understanding. And in that silence, Ilarith felt something his war-forged heart had long forgotten: respect. The storm finally began to thin on the fourth day. Not calm, but survivable. Reynolds stood near the cracked blast door, watching dust swirl into gray light. The horizon was still hidden behind a curtain of frozen debris, but the sensors on his wrist flickered with faint signals, power signatures to the east. A chance, maybe a ship, maybe hope. He turned to Ilarith, who sat sharpening a shattered shard of armor into a makeshift blade. "You think you can walk?" The alien flexed his damaged limbs. His left leg still trembled with every motion, but his eyes burned with determination. "Jyri do not crawl when the path opens." "That's a yes, then," Reynolds said, forcing a grin. They packed what little they had, rations, water, a cracked flare beacon, and stepped into the storm. The outpost that had once been a fortress now looked like a graveyard, a monument of twisted steel and shattered pride. As they walked, Reynolds could hear the aliens breathing through the wind. Every few minutes Ilarith stumbled, and every time Reynolds was there, an arm beneath his massive frame steadying him. You could leave me, Alarith said after the third fall. You would travel faster. Yeah, Reynolds said, but I'd get bored without your sparkling personality. The alien gave a rumbling sound, and not anger, not quite laughter. Something in between. Hours passed. The storm lightened into cold mist. They reached a broken bridge stretched over a ravine filled with ice and debris. On the far side, a beacon blinked a soft, pulsing red. That's it, Reynolds whispered. Distress transmitter. We can boost the signal, and he didn't finish. The bridge groaned, metal snapping under frost. Half the structure dangled into the void. Alarith studied it with his alien gaze. Too unstable. Your weight may hold, mine will not. Then I'll cross first, set a tether, and... You will fall, Alarith cut in sharply. Your balance is poor, your bones are weak. Reynolds smirked. You're really bad at pep talks. Before the alien could protest, the human began to cross. The bridge screamed under every step. Wind howled through the gaps. Frost dusted his armor. Below, the void waited, endless and silent. Halfway across, the beam beneath him cracked. Reynolds dropped to one knee, gripping the edge. Human, Alarith roared. I'm fine, Reynolds shouted, then froze as the entire section shifted beneath him. Without hesitation, Alarith surged forward, ignoring the warnings in his wounded body. The bridge shuddered, threatening to collapse completely under his weight. He reached out, one clawed hand catching Reynolds' wrist just as the metal gave way. The two hung suspended over the void. The cold tore at their faces. Alarith's muscles screamed. Let go, Reynolds shouted. You'll fall too. The alien snarled, voice raw. Gyri do not abandon their own. Since when am I your own? Alarith's grip tightened. His voice dropped to a growl that almost broke. Since you stayed. With a roar that echoed across the ravine, he heaved Reynolds upward. The human scrambled over the edge, gasping. The bridge groaned one last time, and held. Barely. Reynolds lay there for a moment, chest heaving, staring up at the sky. You're insane, he muttered. Alarith collapsed beside him. Possibly. After a long silence, Reynolds laughed. It wasn't the nervous laughter of fear. It was the exhausted, disbelieving laughter of someone who'd run out of ways to explain the world. Alarith glanced at him, confused. Why do you emit that sound? Because, Reynolds said, still catching his breath. We're not dead. Alarith tilted his head, then looked up at the blinking red beacon. Not yet. Together, they crawled to the transmitter. Reynolds rewired it with trembling hands, coaxing power through damaged circuits. A weak signal flickered alive, a universal distress code. As the beacon pulsed through the endless storm, Alarith watched the human beside him, bruised, frostbitten, yet still smiling. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a quiet realization that this strange, fragile creature was no longer an enemy or even a curiosity. He was something more, a reminder that worth was not born in strength, but in staying, when all else was broken. The beacon pulsed weakly under the bruised sky. One red blink every 4 seconds, a heartbeat in the cold. Reynolds crouched beside it, his gloved fingers trembling from exhaustion. The wind had died, replaced by a terrible stillness that felt almost sacred. Around them stretched a wasteland of ash and ice, the bones of a battlefield long dead. We'll stay here tonight, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Alarith said nothing at first. He sat nearby, half shadowed by the broken beacon tower, his armor cracked open like an ancient shell. The blue glow from beneath his carapace flickered faintly, the Gyri equivalent of a pulse. You humans, he finally said. You light fires when there is nothing left to burn. Reynolds smiled faintly and ignited a tiny camp flame from a ration heater. Guess it's what we do. The warmth was pitiful, a circle of orange no bigger than a helmet, but it drew them close. The alien's massive frame reflected the light like old stone. The human's face looked carved from fatigue and stubborn hope. For a long time, neither spoke. The wind whispered through the ruins. Then Reynolds broke the silence. You ever wonder why we fight? Elarith's mandibles clicked softly. No soldier wonders. Soldiers obey. Yeah, Reynolds said quietly. That's what they told me too. He poked at the tiny flame. Back home, they said we were fighting for survival, that the Gyri would wipe us out if we didn't stop you. Elarith tilted his head. And yet here we sit, not wiped out. Not victorious, just cold. Guess survival's not the same as living, Reynolds murmured. The alien studied him. The human's words carried a strange softness, a way of seeing war that the Gyri never had. For his kind, conquest was purpose. Honor was earned through domination. But this one, this human, spoke as if victory meant nothing without someone left to share it with. Elarith's gaze drifted to the stars, barely visible through the storm. When I was young, I was told that weakness was the great shame. That mercy was decay. I believed it. Reynolds looked at him. You don't anymore? The alien's voice lowered. You made it difficult. He paused, then unlatched a section of his armor and pulled out something small, a thin metal charm, scarred and bent. Reynolds leaned closer. It looked like a child's trinket shaped like a crescent moon. My offspring gave this to me before I left for war, Elarith said softly. A promise that I would return. I have crushed empires, but not fulfilled that. Reynolds's throat tightened. You have a kid? Had, Elarith corrected. The Dominion was purged. My world burns still. The words fell heavy into the night. The little flame sputtered. Reynolds stared into it, his voice almost gone. My sister didn't make it off Luna Station. I still see her every time I close my eyes. Silence again. But not an empty one this time. Two enemies sat under a broken sky, sharing ghosts. Elarith finally spoke, voice rough with something unfamiliar. Your kind. You are small, fragile, unremarkable. Yet you stand where greater species fall. You stay when there is nothing left to gain. Reynolds looked up. Maybe that's what makes us human. No, Elarith said, shaking his head slowly. That is what makes you worthy. The words landed like an oath. For the first time since the war began, they weren't enemies or soldiers. They were simply survivors. Reynolds smiled faintly. You know, that's the first nice thing you've said to me. Elarith rumbled softly, but almost a laugh. Do not expect it often. The beacon continued to blink, echoing into the void, a fragile promise sent into the stars. Somewhere out there, someone might hear it. But even if they didn't, something had already been found here that no signal could transmit. The bridge between two broken beings who refused to stop caring. As the night deepened, the storm finally cleared, revealing a sky filled with dying stars and one thin moon, the same shape as the charm in Elarith's hand. He turned it once, staring at the reflection of the tiny human flame. Then he whispered, so quietly Reynolds almost didn't hear. You stayed when I was broken, and I will not forget. The beacon's light faded into the dawn, one last flicker before silence. Reynolds awoke to the sound of engines, distant at first like thunder rolling across the horizon, then closer, sharper, familiar. He scrambled up, squinting through the haze. Over the shattered ridge, a human shuttle descended, its thrusters carving twin spirals of dust and light. For a heartbeat, hope flared bright enough to burn the cold away. They heard us, he shouted. They actually heard us. Elarith rose slowly beside him, towering but still weak. His voice rumbled low. That is your kin's craft? Reynolds nodded, smiling, then noticed the alien's hesitation. Hey, relax. Once they see you helped me, they'll... But the rest of the sentence died in his throat. He remembered. The orders burned into every soldier's training. Kill or capture all Dominion remnants. No exceptions. Elarith watched his face closely. They will not welcome me. Reynolds hesitated, jaw tightening. I'll make them understand. The shuttle landed in a spray of dust. A squad of Marines emerged, human armor gleaming silver under the pale light. Their rifles rose in perfect unison. "Lieutenant Reynolds," the lead officer called. "By the stars, you're alive." Reynolds grinned shakily. "Yeah, Then the officer's gaze shifted to the massive silhouette behind him. The alien captain. "The enemy. Contact. Dominion hostile," someone shouted. "Wait, no." Reynolds threw up his arms. "He's not." Plasma fire cracked through the air. Ilarith roared and shoved Reynolds behind a half-buried transport wing. Bolts hissed past them, searing the ground. "Stop shooting," Reynolds screamed, voice drowned by the gunfire. Ilarith's claws dug into the dirt, his breathing ragged. "You lied," he growled. "I didn't," Reynolds shouted back. "They weren't supposed to. Damn it!" The alien's instincts screamed fight back, but he didn't. Not against the human's pleading eyes. Instead, he hunched low, shielding the smaller figure behind him as explosions tore through the wreckage. Reynolds grabbed his comm, yelling into it. "Cease fire! He's injured! He saved me!" Static. Then the commander's cold reply. "Step away from the alien, Lieutenant. That's an order." Reynolds froze. Every fiber of training in his body screamed to obey. But then he looked at Ilarith, bleeding again, silent, his mandibles clenched as if waiting for the inevitable betrayal. The same look he must have seen on countless faces before killing them, and Reynolds made his choice. He stood. He raised his hands, and he stepped between the alien and his own people. The gunfire stuttered, confusion rippling through the squad. The commander's voice sharpened. "Lieutenant Reynolds, what the hell are you doing?" "He's not a threat," Reynolds shouted. "He's my ally." "Your what?" Reynolds' voice cracked with desperation. "He saved my life. He could have killed me 100 times, but he didn't. He's more human than half the men I've served with." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the wind seemed to pause. Ilarith watched, something raw flickering in his eyes. Disbelief, maybe even pain. "You defy your kin for me," he whispered. "Yisha," Reynolds said, not looking back. "Guess I learned it from someone who stayed." Then a new sound cut through the quiet, a shrill alarm from above. From the opposite side of the valley, sleek shapes broke through the clouds, Dominion recovery drones. Cold insectoid and armed, Ilarith's eyes widened. "They track distress signals. They will kill us both," Reynolds cursed under his breath. Perfect timing. Now both factions had found them, and neither wanted them alive. He looked at Ilarith, then at the human soldiers lowering their weapons in confusion. "We run," he said. Ilarith tilted his head. "You would flee your own kind?" Reynolds grinned grimly. "Just for now." And then they were moving. The human dragging the alien through the smoke as two armies converged on the same patch of broken ground. Plasma rained from the sky. The beacon burst into flame. Behind them, through the chaos, Reynolds heard his commander's furious voice over the comm. "Reynolds, you're throwing away your career for a monster." He didn't stop running. "No," he muttered under his breath. "For a friend." Beside him, Ilarith glanced down, breathing hard, his armor cracked and glowing faintly from the heat. For a being bred to conquer, it was a strange feeling, trusting a creature so small, so frail, and yet somehow unbreakable. "You stayed when I was broken," the alien murmured through the smoke, his tone almost reverent. "Now I stay when you are hunted." The valley burned behind them, red fire, blue plasma, and the silver flashes of death. Reynolds ran until his lungs tore, until every breath was a knife. The smoke thickened. The sky pulsed like a wound, and through it all the thunder of Dominion drones and human shuttles echoed in the distance. He didn't look back. He couldn't. He just held on to Ilarith's arm, pulling the alien through the wreckage of a world neither of them could call home anymore. When they finally collapsed inside the mouth of a half-buried maintenance tunnel, silence fell like a blessing. The air was stale, thick with the scent of oil and frost. Reynolds slid to the ground, his chest heaving. We lost them," he said between gasps. Ilarith crouched low beside him, every movement slow and deliberate. "For now," he rumbled. But the signal will draw them still. Both of them. Yeah, Reynolds said quietly. We're ghosts now. For a long time neither spoke. The tunnel lights flickered weakly, painting their faces in alternating bands of shadow and pale light. Ilarith broke the silence first. Your kind will hunt you for this. Mine will hunt me for failure. Reynolds chuckled darkly. Guess that makes us even. The alien tilted his head. No, it makes us the same. He said it so simply that Reynolds didn't know how to respond. He just leaned back against the cold wall and stared into the dark. You ever think we were both fighting for something that was already dead? Ilarith's gaze sharpened. You think worth is found only in victory? Reynolds met his eyes. You don't? The alien's mandibles flexed, his tone low. Once I believed the strong were worthy, that the weak existed to be forgotten. But then, he gestured toward the human's burned armor, the cracked visor, the trembling hands that still reached out to others. Then you stayed. You had nothing left, yet you remained. Reynolds smiled faintly. Maybe that's all any of us can do, you stay. Ilarith stared at him for a long time, as if memorizing the shape of the words. Outside, faint vibrations trembled through the walls, approaching footsteps, mechanical, rhythmic. Reynolds tensed. Drones, the alien rose instantly, towering over him. Too close. We cannot outrun them this time. Reynolds grabbed his rifle, checking the last few rounds. Then we don't run. Ilarith turned sharply toward him. You will die. Maybe, Reynolds said, leveling his weapon toward the tunnel entrance. But not before I make them regret it. The alien's gaze hardened. Then without another word, he stepped forward and planted himself between Reynolds and the light. Reynolds blinked. What are you? Jairi debt must be repaid, Ilarith said. His voice was calm, deep, resolute. You stayed when I was broken. Now I stand when you are hunted. The first drone burst through the tunnel opening, sleek, insectoid, its plasma limbs glowing white-hot. Ilarith's claws flashed in the dark. He tore through it with a single brutal strike, sparks cascading around him. Another came, then two more. Reynolds fired, the tunnel echoing with gunfire and alien roars, the air filled with smoke and static. The drones fell, one after another, until the ground was littered with shattered metal. Then the last explosion came from the far end, collapsing part of the tunnel roof. The blast threw them both to the ground. Dust rained down. Reynolds coughed, struggling to breathe. You still alive? Ilarith groaned, voice faint. Barely. They crawled toward each other through the haze. The alien's armor was cracked open, blue light leaking from his wounds. Reynolds reached him and pressed a trembling hand against the damage. Hold on. Ilarith's mandibles twitched, the Jairi version of a smile. Still giving orders? Human. Reynolds laughed weakly. Guess some habits die hard. The alien leaned back, the weight of exhaustion pressing him down. If we die here, it will not be in vain, yeah? Reynolds asked softly. Ilarith nodded once. Because for one moment our kind stopped being enemies. The sound of more engines rumbled in the distance. Both turned toward the fading light of the tunnel entrance. Shadows approached, many, too many. Reynolds gripped his weapon again. Ilarith raised his claws, his stance unsteady but proud. Side by side? Reynolds asked. Until the end, the alien said. And as the shadows drew near, two figures, human and Jairi, stood together in the darkness, facing the world that had abandoned them both. Whatever came next, they would meet it together. The footsteps grew louder. Dozens of them. Reynolds tightened his grip on the rifle until his knuckles went white. Ilarith stood beside him, shoulders trembling but head held high. The tunnel light flickered over their faces, one pale with human grit, one scarred and blue-lit with alien fury. Then the attackers came. Not drones this time, soldiers, humans, and behind them, metallic shadows of Dominion reinforcements, drawn by the same distress beacon. Two armies, two enemies, one target. The tunnel filled with shouts and the hiss of charging plasma. Reynolds and Ilarith stood their ground as the first wave came through. Fall back, Reynolds shouted. They'll collapse the tunnel. Ilarith's deep voice rumbled beside him. Then we bring it down on their heads. They fought like a single creature, the human precision, alien strength. Ilarith tore through metal with his claws while Reynolds covered his blind spots, every shot measured, every breath timed to the other's movements. But the numbers were too great. A plasma bolt struck Ilarith in the shoulder, spinning him backward. Reynolds dove to drag him behind cover, shouting over the chaos. "Stay with me!" "I am," the alien gasped. "Always." He ripped a power conduit from the wall and hurled it into the enemy line. The explosion shook the ground. Dust and smoke filled the tunnel. When it cleared, the human commander stepped forward, visor gleaming, rifle raised. "Reynolds, you've crossed the line." "Step aside." Reynolds stood, chest heaving. "He's not the enemy. You're protecting a war criminal." Ellerith tried to rise, but Reynolds placed a hand on his shoulder. "No more," he whispered. Then he turned back to his commander. "You don't understand. He saved me. He could have killed me when I was helpless, but he didn't." "You call that a monster?" The commander's voice was cold. "Orders are orders." Reynolds's heart sank. He looked at Elarith, the alien who had once been his nightmare, now the only friend he had left in the galaxy. And then, quietly, he said, "You should run." Elarith stared at him. "And leave you?" "You did your part," Reynolds said, forcing a smile through the pain. "Now it's my turn to stay." For a heartbeat, Elarith didn't move. His 4 eyes shimmered with emotion too complex for words, grief, defiance, and something deeper. Then he gripped Reynolds' arm. "You are a fool, human." "Yeah," Reynolds whispered. "But a stubborn one." The alien nodded once, the warrior's farewell. He turned toward the side shaft, limping, his blood leaving glowing trails behind. Reynolds stepped into the open. The soldiers hesitated, rifles trained on him. "You want someone to blame?" he said. "Blame me." He fired into the ceiling. The tunnel groaned. Metal shrieked. The roof began to collapse. Elarith looked back one last time. Their eyes met through the dust and falling debris. Then the tunnel came down. Silence. Cold wind. And dawn. Hours later, rescue teams from both sides converged on the site. They found only ruins, twisted beams, and one impossible thing: a small beacon still blinking faintly under the rubble. When the Dominion scavengers unearthed the wreckage, they found tracks leading out through a side passage. One set of heavy alien steps, and beside them, the drag marks of a wounded human. Both vanished into the wastes. Years later, the war was over. The Dominion shattered, humanity rebuilding. Amid the peace accords, stories spread of a human and a gyri seen together, wandering the border worlds, saving refugees from both sides. No one could prove it. But the legend grew. They said the alien bore a broken crest and carried a human rifle. They said the human wore Dominion metal on his chest, shaped like a crescent moon. And when either species spoke of loyalty or compassion, they whispered the same phrase, words carried down from one battle, one bond, one impossible friendship. "You stayed when I was broken, human. That makes you worthy."